Hello, in this video we'll be going over the reading section of the ACT. These are tips and hacks for success on this section. So first off, what does the reading section look like? So you've got 35 minutes to answer 40 questions, and you have 4 different passages which are each a different type of text. So you've got a literary fiction story, which is basically like a short story that you would read in class. You've got a social science article that's often about history, sometimes about psychology, maybe geography. Then you have a humanities article. Often that's an article about music history or art or an artist, something like that. And then you have natural sciences. That might be something that's about agriculture or biology. So again, you've got 10 questions on each of those passages and 35 minutes to answer those. So here's the thing. That's a lot of reading that you're expected to do in 35 minutes. And you don't actually need to read all of it unless you're aiming for a really high score or you're just a fast reader. So first off, set a goal. If you want to earn, say, a 21, that's about the state average. So that might be your goal in general. You only need to answer 22 out of 40 questions correctly. That means your best bet is just to read 2 of the passages. That's it. That would give you 16 minutes per passage. Just read those 2 passages and really focus on the questions on those passages. And then in your last 3 minutes of the test, on the other 2 passages, just fill in the bubbles. That's it. And we'll talk more about filling in the bubbles later. If you want to get a 26, which is obviously higher, if you want to go to maybe a highly selective school or a more selective college, then you might want a 26 in that range. You would need 27 or 28 correct. In that case, you need to read 3 of the passages and only guess on 1. That would give you about 10 or 11 minutes per passage. And finally, if you want a 31, which I believe is still Bright Flight scores, which gets you a bit of a scholarship, you would need 35 out of 40 correct. In that case, you're going to have to read all 4 of the passages, but definitely leave the most difficult one for last. Don't start with it. That's going to gobble up too much of your time. So doing this way would give you about 7 to 8 minutes per passage. So this is a big thing on the ACT and really any standardized test. Your background knowledge and your opinion does not matter. I'm terribly sorry about that, but it's the truth. So the only way that background knowledge really matters is vocabulary. So like if the text uses the word yacht, it's helpful to know what a yacht is. If it uses the word adamant, it's helpful to know what adamant means. But other than that, the correct answer is going to be like what the narrator says or what the text says, either explicitly or implicitly. So it's not your personal opinion. If it asks what a word means, that's not your thoughts on what the word means. That's how the text uses the word. So again, it's standardized, meaning opinions, they matter for nothing in this. Sorry. So here are a few things to do before you actually read the passages. You don't actually want to start with the passages. You actually want to start with choosing which passages to read. Remember, most of you are probably only going to actually read 2 to 3 of the passages. You don't need to read all 4. So don't automatically start with the first passage. I believe they're set up in the same order on every test, and the first one is always literary fiction. That's a story. So if you hate reading stories and you just don't get them, don't start with that. Play to your strengths. If you do love reading fiction and that's what you get, you just understand it, start with passage 1, the literary narrative. If math and science is more your thing, start with passage 4. That's going to be natural sciences. If you enjoy reading about music and art, start with the humanities passage. Okay, if your goal score is to get a 31 or so, you're not choosing which one to leave out, you're choosing which one to leave till last, which one looks the hardest. In my personal experience, I mean, science is probably the subject I struggle with the most, so I would probably leave the science one until last. And you're going to skim the questions. This is another way of choosing which passage you want to read. So look for the passage with the shortest questions. Here's an example. So you see on the top one, you see a bunch of long question choices. If all of the questions for a passage are ultra long, I wouldn't start with that one. If you look at this one that says number 5 at the bottom, oh look, a short little question. If you've got short little one-word choices, I would start with the passage that has short questions. Okay, that's your best bet. This test is really not so much about reading, so much as reading quickly, which is kind of a measure of how you would do in college, because, I mean, in college you're expected to read a lot of text, like 100 pages in a week on your own, 100 or more, and so being able to read quickly is an important skill. So that's, I think, that's my take on why you're tested on basically speed reading. So, guessing. Always answer every single question. Do not leave blank bubbles. Ever. Never, never, never leave blank bubbles. There's no penalty for guessing. So if you get them wrong, big deal. I mean, they're no wronger than they'd be if they were blank. And if you get them right, yay, good guess. The other thing, when you're guessing, so let's say you just plain didn't read passage 2. So numbers 11 through 20 you'd be guessing on. Don't skip around with bubbles. It is a better strategy just to choose one position. So just fill them all in C's and H's, because there's just a higher probability that there are going to be some C's. And if you just go A, G, A, G, A, G, there's a chance that it's going to be the opposite. So this is just a better strategy for getting some correct. The other thing you want to do before you read the passages is to read the questions first. That's the questions. As you can see down at the bottom, don't read the answer choices because that will distract you, just the questions. So you do want to circle words on the questions. That's words like not or except, because that means all the choices are right except one. You might want to circle names and keywords. That might be terms that are related to the subject, like if the text is about apples or agriculture, you'd want to circle the right terms. And line references, that's the big one. So many questions will say, according to lines 35 through 36, what does the narrator think of this other character? So you should underline lines 35 and then 36, and then you should go back to the passage. There are little line numbers about every 5 to 10 lines. It'll say 50, 60, 70. So you'll want to find those lines and mark them out to the side. You might actually be able just to read those paragraphs if you're pressed for time without reading the rest of the passage. Here's an example. So you can see the question 14 up here says the author indicates that the common factor in the events and periods listed in lines 50 through 54 is that they. So you would find where it says 50 out to the side, and then you would, draw a line over by it and write the question, the number of the question beside it. So as you're reading, hey, look, here's an answer. The question to answer number 14 is right here in this section. And that way you don't have to keep switching back and forth between the question and the passage. These are all just time-saving hacks. So, a few things to do while you're reading the passages. Okay, normally in class, you should read everything thoroughly and really look for meaning. The ACT is not like that. You do not want to read everything. So on the humanities, social science, and natural sciences passages, you don't want to read the whole thing. Definitely read the first and last paragraphs. That's an introduction and conclusion. Those are almost certainly going to tell you the topic or main idea. That's going to be important. And if there are any questions about the tone or the author's purpose, like the author most nearly wants the reader to, you're probably going to find answers to that in the first and last paragraphs. You're going to want to skim the body paragraphs, so don't read them thoroughly word for word unless you're a really fast reader. You do want to read the first and last sentence of those paragraphs, though, because that's where you have a topic sentence usually. You can tell what the topic of that sentence is going to be. Now, you might write notes out to the side, like if a paragraph is about, if it's a biography and it's about Eleanor Roosevelt's childhood, you might just write childhood out to the side of a paragraph. If it's about her, campaigning for racial equality, you might write equality next to a paragraph. The literary fiction section is different. It is not so much a matter of topic sentences. You kind of have to read the whole thing on that one, but read it quickly, not word for word. Look for character names and important events. So that leads to this other strategy. While you are reading, circle keywords in the text. So that might be names. So if it's an article about scientists, you might circle the scientists' names. Places. So if it's a geography article and it's talking about, mountain ranges, you might circle the names of mountains or the places where these mountains exist. You also want to circle terms related to the main topic or idea. So if it's about racial inequality, you might circle words that say justice or inequality, because as we'll see in some of these later slides, often questions are paraphrased, so it's good to have different ways that the author puts it circled. The other big one, circle contrast words. This is especially true in the nonfiction passages, so basically everything except the literary fiction one. So words like however, therefore, but, in spite of, on the other hand, nevertheless, even though, those are super important. They signal a shift in meaning. So there might be a question that says, even though this person thought this person, and so those places that you've circled are going to help you find those answers. Here's an example. So we can see that the first paragraph up here is talking about both Eleanor Roosevelt and her husband, Franklin Roosevelt. And then this however at the beginning of the next paragraph signals that this paragraph is talking about their differences. So we went from talking about what they have in common and how they admired each other and worked together to talking about how they disagreed. This is a hint or hack for any test, honestly. As you're answering questions, if you know something is wrong, eliminate it immediately. Cross it out. You don't want to go back and reread that one. If you're not sure, leave it uncircled. And this is another tip. This is just a matter of saving time so that you don't have to flip back and forth between your test booklet and your bubble sheet. Circle the answers in the test booklet first, and then after you're done with that passage, like those 10 questions, then put them into the bubble sheet. That's just a time-saving device. And that way you're also less likely to get off. So if you start out filling in the bubbles and you mean to be starting with number 11, but you accidentally start with number 12, then you're just going to be confused, and you're going to probably have to go back and look at the questions and make sure the one you thought was number 11 is really number 12. Circle the questions in the booklet. It'll make your life easier. Here's an example. You look at the passage, you circle things there. It's kind of hard to see them, but they're circled in white. Then you fill out your bubble sheet. All right. Next, we're going to talk about some tricky questions, some question traps. One trap, I mentioned this earlier, but you should beware of answer choices that use exact wording from the passage. A lot of times, tests like the ACT want to ensure that you can synthesize information, and synthesizing often means putting things in your own words or understanding something when it's said in a different way. So many of the correct answers are going to be paraphrases. That is, they're going to say the same thing or get at the same main idea, but in different words. Here's an example. So the question is, according to the last paragraph, which of the following statements would the author most likely make with regard to ER's vision and ideals? So one choice we have is ER considered politics a game and played only when she knew she could win. And you might think, oh, politics a game. Well, man, that last paragraph, it mentioned the game and she enjoyed the game. So, oh, this is right. The thing is, it's not. Because the parts I've highlighted have in red text, you can see that those are really the opposite meaning. The answer choice says she played only when she knew she could win, but the text says she never considered a political setback a permanent defeat, which means that sometimes she was playing the game even when she was losing. So just a hint, if it says the exact same phrase as the text, it's probably wrong. So here's an example of how the paraphrased answer would be correct. So you can see the choice says based on widespread citizen participation, and the text says people themselves organize, which is another way of saying citizen participation. So again, these questions, they're not necessarily there to trick you. It's more that they're there to make sure you know how to paraphrase and synthesize information. But a good way of hacking the test is just if it uses the same phrase or word as the text, that choice is probably wrong. Trap number 2, absolute words. If you see words like always, never, all, completely, totally, only, every, or absolutely, be aware. Those are probably a trap. Because if it says always, that means there are no exceptions. So if I say, Bob always rode the bus to school, well, if there was like one day that he walked to school, then that answer would be wrong. So if a single word in that answer is wrong, the entire answer is wrong, and you can just cross it out. So these always questions, almost certainly the wrong choice. Number 3, this is just in general, but pay close attention to the wording of questions. So make sure you know who the question is asking about. For example, on the next one, on the next slide, you'll see, is the question asking about the narrator or a character? So we have this, the question is the 6th paragraph reveals that the narrator is, and we want character traits that describe the narrator. So a letter D, it says aware, respectful, and tenacious, and you might be reading the paragraph up here and say, I came to respect her tenacity. Be like, ooh, tenacity, tenacious. Those are like the same thing. That must be the right answer. Wrong. Oops, let's go back. That is not the right answer because I came to respect her tenacity. That means the narrator is talking about someone else here. So again, this is perhaps the humanities and literary fiction ones. You're more likely to have to read more to get meaning and things like character traits. But when it says, I came to respect her tenacity, you could look at that. And so someone who respects something is probably open-minded and accepting. So that would describe the narrator. So let's review these tips to remember. The first thing, if it uses the exact words from the text, it is probably the wrong answer choice. Number 2, most correct answers are going to be a paraphrase of the text. That means they're going to use different words to say the same thing. Number 3, look for line reference questions. You mark those before you read. That's keywords, phrases, names that appear in the questions. And read those questions carefully. Number 4, if a single word in the answer is wrong, eliminate that answer. So if it says always or completely, you can bet that that answer is wrong and just cross it off. Okay, now we're going to look at types of questions on the ACT. So some questions are going to be specific or literal questions. Those are the easier questions because it means you will literally find the answer in the text. So examples of the way these questions are written, it might say the passage states, or the passage indicates, or the house is located on. These are kind of the what questions, like who did this? Or what is the name of this? Yeah, so here's an example. The passage indicates that instruments for determining longitude now include, so we want, when it says now include, that's a clue that it's probably, the right answer is probably going to be listed in the passage. And it says when a network of satellites can nail down a ship's position. Okay, so it mentions satellites up there. Oh, the question mentions satellites. What do you know? The answer is satellites. Most questions, however, are not going to be literal. They're going to be general or inferential questions. These are ones that are at testing your ability to determine the main idea or to make an inference. Remember, inference is reading between the lines. So maybe the text doesn't come right out and say that the narrator is open-minded and accepting, but they're, the things that this narrator does may show that they are open-minded and accepting. This is also vocabulary questions, which are, again, you have to actually read the text to get those. Those are questions where it's a word that could be used one way in this paragraph, but you might also be able to use it another way. And then examples of these question frames. So if it says, most likely to, or this person could best be described as, or the text suggests. So suggest is a clue that you're making an inference there. Or it can be inferred that. Obviously, that's an inference. So the next few question examples we're going to look at are examples of using context clues to determine the meaning of a word. So we have, as it is used in line 65, the word complement most nearly means what? So again, since it gives a line reference, you would have marked that line while you were reading the passage or before you were reading the passage so that you would know where to look for this. And so it says, similarly, we have a right to a full complement of wildlife on our public, the sentence should read, lands. So don't choose just the most obvious answer. So one form of complement, even though it's spelled differently, would be complement with an I, means flattering remark. But does that make sense in the sentence? We have a right to a full flattering remark of wildlife on our public lands? Really? That makes no sense. Selection would be the right answer because that makes sense in the sentence. So sometimes you can just substitute answers in. The one that makes the most sense is probably going to be the correct answer. Here's another example, and this one took a little more thinking. As it is used in line 66, the word derelict most nearly means. Now, there are multiple definitions of derelict. So if you talk about dereliction of duty, then that's someone who has without a sense of duty. A derelict building probably is going to be empty or abandoned and isolated from the main structure, kind of sounds like that. However, if you look in the text, it says both those that still contain living coral and those that stand derelict, which means that we've got a contrast set up. Derelict in this case is set up as the opposite of those that still contain living coral, which means that it's void of living organisms. One more context clues question. In this line, the word domain most nearly means. So again, don't just go with the most obvious one. I first look at the word domain and I think living space. But if I look at the sentence and it says the biomechanics of energy storage is the domain of these mechanist. It's probably not talking about living space in their roles as scientists. In this case, it's probably talking about an area of expertise because that makes the most sense in this sentence. Okay, another type of inferential question will be getting at the author's meaning or your ability to paraphrase. And this is what we talked about with the correct answer most likely being a paraphrase. So the narrator's statement, she wouldn't break though, most nearly means that in the author's opinion, Olga is stronger than she appears to be. So, you're paraphrasing to get at meaning. And that phrase most nearly means, that's an indicate that indicates that you're looking for a paraphrase. The next one, according to the narrator, which of the following statements was true about Eugene when the narrator first talked to him? Now you'll see up here it says Eugene liked me, but he was shy. The text said he had come to like her, but felt nervous. So you can see it's a paraphrase and it changed the point of view. The original text was in first person. The narrator's talking and the question choice puts it into third person. So be aware that that is one way that things can be paraphrased. The next one, it asks you basically to define a phrase as it is used in the passage. So in this case, rituals of friendship is referring to that entire list in red. So basically, the right answer choice isn't so much paraphrasing as summarizing earlier information. This would be another one. It's basically finding the meaning of the overall passage. It's not so much a paraphrase as deciding on the meaning. I mean, allowing the memory of the land to return, that's basically personification. So you're saying, here's what that personification means. Here's the literal definition of that personification. It means they were permitted to return to their natural condition of, having native plants like sunflowers. Some inferential questions are asking about the relationship among ideas. So that's cause and effect relationships or compare-contrast relationships. So in this case, we have a question. The author indicates that the main cause of the failure of the McLean Deluxe was that. These are the kind of questions you might save for last because they actually generally required you to read more of the paragraph more carefully. So you can look for key words, like in bold we've got more important though. Though is a word you want to circle because it's a contrast word. It's going to be saying that before this we were talking about one cause, but now we're going to be talking about a more important cause. So it was rushed to market before, it failed to promote it through advertising. I mean, it doesn't really mention that. And the next one, it was rushed to market because production problems were solved. It says production kinks had been worked out. So that is a paraphrase, kind of, but it doesn't offer the main cause because that next sentence says more important, though. Market hamburger, that doesn't make sense in this case, and people knew it was supposed to be good for them. That is a paraphrase, basically, of that last sentence. So you can see the last sentence is written as a question. It was sold as the healthy choice, and who goes to McDonald's for health food? Well, that's a rhetorical question. The answer to it would be no one goes to McDonald's for health food. So your paraphrase isn't so much a paraphrase as stating the main idea in very different words. So in summary, we have almost reached the end of this video, I promise. So in summary, you've got several traps on this reading questions. So traps, but also hacks to keep in mind. So your correct answers are probably going to be paraphrases of the text. And paraphrase, remember from writing research, that doesn't mean we just change like one word. That means you're stating the main idea in a completely different way. So you want to avoid those answers that use exact words or words that are really close to what the text says. Look out for those absolute questions. If it says always, never, or totally, it's probably wrong. Number 4, pay attention to contrast words. The one that we just looked at was more importantly, though, the though that says that we're transitioning to a different topic. Circle that. Look for limitations to see all the question related to the text. We didn't really talk about this in the slides, but at the time or first, last, before, that means you're not going to look at just something that happened. You want to look at a specific point in the text. So So this goes with paying attention to relationships. So make sure you know what order things happened in. Number 6, when interpreting words or phrases, make sure you check how each one is used in the text. So if you substitute your answer into the text, it should make sense. If it doesn't make sense, it's wrong. The other thing, if you're answering negative questions, so that's like all of the following are correct except, kind of read it as true or false. So you want the one question that is not true. Okay, you want to choose the false choice. If it says the least likely thing is, choose the thing that is not likely. And the final one, this is the one we had at the beginning. Your background information, I mean, sure, kind of halfway matters, especially in understanding words, but the text is the final authority. The ACT is not interested in your opinion. It's sad, but it's true. All right, and lastly, good job for making it through all of these tips and hacks for the reading section of the ACT, and good luck.